Time flowed by, and he gleaned all that he could from his threats as he let them explore the planes where he waged his wars. He learned of other primes, many bursting at the seams with life, magic, and links to the hosts, and for a time he looked to these places for power and possible information on those who would threaten him. He had started to wage wars against many planes at once, using his Dark Host duplicates to do his bidding, with them acting as conduits for his power, and each of them being gifted a spark of his own, so they may also duplicate those lesser creatures that they would slay or take into their fold. This was where the great planar war began, as this was when the primes would once more become aware of his presence, and his now growing power. He sought out a plane that would be a single forward power base to launch his spearhead from, and he took it swiftly. These daemons merely a drop towards his now vast and growing power. He chose this place as it was close to the prime he was targeting, and also because for some reason someone had left him an open portal of permanence to use for his assault. He would not give such an opportunity up easily. This prime had a myriad of heroes upon it, as well as their adversaries. He decided not to announce his presence immediately, as he sat and witnessed the sheer power of the host's own believers here, and was taken aback by their competence in wielding their gifts. They could actually prove challenging, he mused, as he slowly looked around. Taking a lesser life, a young child born of magic, he walked the lands where the child had been born. This place was strange, with a mass of sentient life like he had never seen, and a background level of pure magic that was unlike anything he had ever felt since his reckoning with the spine. Yes, he should walk among them before he would wage war here. He tried to manifest his powers to protect this vessel, but discovered that, although his essence could pass into this prime, he could not summon a tether to his host shell, thereby meaning that as he walked here, his true self residing within his host would never know what he knew, unless he returned to it so it could absorb what he had discovered. It was a strange feeling to have left his body, drifting almost lost in this tiny mortal shell of sinew and blood, not knowing what was transpiring where he had left his host. It took a while for him to realize that this must be how those who were slain must feel, no longer having a place to reside, merely floating away from what they knew, no longer having their anchor to their realm. He did not enjoy this feeling. He felt vulnerable. He also discovered that this creature was getting harder to control the longer he spent from the host, and after a week or so of time in this prime, he felt he needed to return to renew the power he felt falling from him, as his threads were not strong enough to control it for too long. As he re-entered his host, the shell he had created went back to the world, devoid of purpose, but in time he would be able to implant purpose to them, giving them a drive to serve and spread his threads. This he had to do if he was to accomplish anything here. Here where the ambient magic was far greater than his own tethers, where he could not manipulate the weave as easily as he normally could. But why? Why could he not do so? His drone shell wandered the world for a month or two, and when it returned, it brought with it the news of many things it had heard, but he needed definitive answers to specific questions. But these duplications could not think for themselves, so he would have to wait. Perhaps wait until he found something that would work for him for payment, perhaps, as this seemed the way of beings of the primes.
Years passed, and he slowly took enough native shells to number 40. These would form his spearhead of information gathering, as limited as it was at present. He needed to capture more useful creatures, as these farmers, peasants, and dying miscreants, as unseen as they were by the societies they infiltrated, were ultimately nothing more than silent zombies, unthinking, and merely gathering minor facts about the immediate area. He needed one of the followers of a host, what they called a priest. Yes, one of these would be perfect, as then he could gain vast information on their very gods. And so he sought a priest out, a lowly one that might be missed. He travelled himself in created shell, and in quick time he found one. He was dressed in black, and hid himself from others around him, much like those he had already taken. And so, in a darkened alley, he approached this creature. As he neared, it turned to him, and he saw it as one of those known to the Prime as a human. He had seen them seeded throughout the primes he had spied upon thus far, and seemed to be one of the most proliferate of races around, spreading their numbers much like him, although slower, across their realms.
"Greetings! Could I be of assistance to you, sir?"
it said, addressing him as he approached.
"Do you seek aid?"
Too easy, he thought, as he drew closer to him. "Yes, I seek information on your god." A smile crept across his face.
"Oh, you wish to meet him?"
it said, as though it was a simple matter. "Why, yes," he said, and stood in front of his quarry, waiting for what he needed to do, ready to follow his new-found friend.
"He is this way,"
it said, motioning him down the crooked alley. He smiled and nodded. "Thank you, friend," beginning to walk the path as directed. "This was too easy, and soon I shall find—" And with that, his body shot through with pain. Looking down, he could see a sliver of metal protruding from his chest.
"You shall see him soon enough,"
the voice said, shrieking with glee as its possessor drew the blade from him and plunged it again and again into his back. The pain was great, but strangely comforting. He could not feel within his host, but in this body he could actually experience such sensations. The point of the piercing of the skin, the puncturing of the flesh, and the pain of his sinew and organs being sliced, and it was a joyful thing to him. He turned to his assailant, smiling, and mouthed the words, "Thank you," as he realized his shell could no longer stand, as blood gushed from the wounds, and the body crumpled slowly. It stood over him, still smiling, but shocked at his reaction.
You felt nothing?"
And it nudged him gently with his foot. He tried to respond, but found he could not speak, and as he tried, he just spat out the blood that was filling his lungs and mouth. "These meat things are very frail," he noted, as he lay there in the dying shell. But he realized that, although life was slipping from this shell, he was still able to observe the world around him, and he watched on as it turned him over and searched his body for something useful. It seemed happy when he discovered coins upon him, and he took them for its own, leaving his body to ebb away in a dark corner. He waited, and hours later, vermin arrived, a few at first, fighting amongst themselves for fresh pickings of this feast. Soon more came, and soon he could barely see the world, for their numbers were vast, like the creations of the demonic hordes, and then shortly he could see nothing, for his eyes were torn out and devoured. So he found he had to resort to seeing through the threads that were rapidly fading from his body. But what was this? These creatures, although not of a magical nature themselves, actually carried magic. Of course, the ambient levels of this place meant there was a possibility that all creatures were held with at least some magical power, as it permeated them throughout their lives, flowing through the realms unseen to the lower forms of life. He reached out to one of them, and found it was easy to control. So, although he could not duplicate them, as he was not with his host, he could jump bodies and see the world through the eyes of the lesser creatures, or perhaps head back and gain a more useful body. He would see more first. These creatures, rats as he understood them, ran through the city, heading from meal to meal, from corpse to dropped snack, and opportune kills, with the rest of the pack. Host? Pack? Swarm. He would have to learn the correct terms for these things at some point, but for now he needed to ride the body back to the host. He discovered that his threads were actually too much power for this creature, and slowly it began to falter and decay, as the sheer power of the elevated magic within it was far too high for its body to hold, and it started to break down and disintegrate. Quickly he shifted his power to another of the pack, and started to herd it back to the host portal. He now knew that the lesser creatures could be used to escape capture, ride forms with, and spy where the larger sentient ones could not approach. This could come in useful, he was sure, if he could find a way to utilize it, as it appeared the denizens of the realms either ignored them or tolerated their presence, as the numbers were insurmountable, and their fact of being was an accepted one. As he reached the host and placed his threads back within it, he felt the many become one once more, as all the threads he held within knitted together again and absorbed the knowledge. Now all threads knew what this thread had known, and this is how he must continue. Scout, run, report, over and over, until he was ready. But first, he had a score to settle.